Dear friends, Birshut, Chacham Toledano, and all of you, I am in great trouble. But before I tell you why, I want to show you something. This is a portrait of our famous Spinoza, which my father made while he was ondergedoken, hidden in the war, in the Diesestraat here in Amsterdam. And this was always hanging in our front room for all the years. Now you know from where I hail. A completely secular family, Jewish family, assimilated totally. And Spinoza was our supreme authority in our family. He was our home rabbi. As you know, my name is Nathan Lopes Cardozo. I'm probably the only one around here who is actually family of Spinoza. There were people in our community, or better in our family, by that very name. And I have something else in common with him. I am, and I hope you understand, a lapsed heretic. Een afvallige ketter. And I became, nebbig, an Orthodox rabbi. I have no idea what that means, Orthodox, because there is nothing Orthodox about Orthodox Judaism. Whether I will be, in another 20 minutes, still an Orthodox rabbi, I leave up to you to decide. I love heresy, ketterij. We nearly owe all our knowledge not to those who have agreed with us, but those who have differed with us. Doubt is the source of inquiry. Yet large sections of religious Jews and Gentiles live in a self-assured ease and contentment, tevredenheid. The trouble is that this is also true for lots of secular people. Secularity is part of their contentment. But who wants to live in contentment? Religion is used to comfort the troubled. But I think we should use religion, to trouble the comfortable. Friends, it is completely impossible to say something of enough depth about the ban on Spinoza within 15 minutes. This limitation was given to me by Crescas, and that is enough of a reason to put a ban on Crescas. So I will have to be a little superficial, a little blunt, and I apologize for that. I suggest in all sincerity that we should immediately remove the ban on Spinoza. And for those who know Yiddish, and I hope my Portuguese geloofsgenoten will forgive me this, it is a garpe, a boesje, and a schande, a shameful business that this has not yet happened. And let me explain why. Spinoza's philosophy is extremely beautiful. The Ethics is a wonderful book, full of deep insights and above all of noble ideas and noble feelings. It may sound strange, but I believe that Spinoza was also the first secular tzaddik, righteous person. I once wrote an essay asking why the ethics were not given to Moses at Mount Sinai. No time to explain. But the truth about it is that Spinoza is very, very Jewish in his ideas. Still, his ideas about God and the Torah are partially mistaken because he did not understand that God and Torah, as understood by the Jewish tradition, belong to a totally different category than philosophical speculation. It is the difference between a hard disk and a computer chip, if you understand. No time to explain. Later. I personally owe a lot to Spinoza, because it was he who inspired me to start studying the Jewish tradition. I started to read his works when I was a kid of about 15, 16 years old because of my father, and I never stopped. I study Spinoza's ethics nearly every day. When? After I come home from synagogue, where I had prayed. Why would I pray? Because it is the only way that I remind myself that I am not God. But before I open the ethics, nearly every morning, I first study my great love, the Talmud. This is the most outrageous text I ever studied. An unprecedented transcript of the size of 24 huge volumes of a 7th century long, stormy, and sometimes outrageous and unsurpassed debate between hundreds of the earliest and most remarkable sages, discussing God, the Bible, Revelation, outer space life, economy, damages, international law, and so on. It even teaches a woman how to seduce her husband in the bedroom. For a small fee, I will tell you afterwards. The majority of people know little about Baruch Spinoza's philosophy. His philosophy is difficult. Most people know him as the fellow who was excommunicated by the Jews. And that's where the problem starts. As a very young person, I spoke with lots of people here in Amsterdam who had Spinoza's works read carefully, thoroughly, and also had a very good understanding what the Jewish tradition was all about. And when I heard what they told me and what I read afterwards, I got a little suspicious, wantrouwend. In spite, ondanks, his lofty ideas, lofty in every sense of the word, in the ethics, it became clear to me that the Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, Spinoza, in that work, was misrepresenting the Jewish tradition in ways which are highly dubious and problematic. For some of this, he could not be blamed. But it became also clear to me that some of his misrepresentations were clearly deliberate, met voorbedachte raden, as we say in Dutch. Since there is no time for all many examples to give, I will only mention one or two of them. One which he could not help. Spinoza, as we have heard before, was the student of Rabbi Shaul Mortera, the most important, or at least one of the most important rabbis of our Portuguese gemeente in Amsterdam, who happened to have been a very strong follower of the Rambam, of Maimonides, the celebrated 11th century Jewish philosopher we have all heard of. But, and hear well what I say, it was Maimonides who did a great good for the Jewish tradition, but also did a great amount of harm to the Jewish tradition. And I tell you why. Maimonides misconstrued Judaism in ways which were highly unfortunate because, let me use that expression, he hijacked the Jewish tradition. His great mistake was that he dogmatized Judaism and made it into a conventional religion. Maimonides claimed that the whole of Judaism was founded on dogmas. The 13 famous dogmas which we still sing Friday night in the synagogue. The Ikarei ha'emunah, as they are called in Hebrew. The problem with these 13 dogmas is that there are no dogmas in the Jewish tradition. Dogma is the outgrowth of a systematic theology. But there is no such thing as a systematic theology in the Jewish tradition. Everything, literally everything, is up to debate. Dogmas are not open to discussion, can't evolve, and are finally decided by a synod, a conclave, but there is no catechism within the Jewish tradition. There is no synod, no conclave or any other institution of binding character in Judaism which lays down dogmas. The trouble is that because of the enormous standing of Maimonides, and he was incredibly great, no doubt about that, in the Jewish tradition, or better, in the Jewish community, these 13 principles of faith have overshadowed the rest of what Judaism basically stands for. What is worse, and hear well, is that Maimonides declared that once one would believe in these dogmas, one would be admitted to heaven, het hiernamaals, even when one would transgress all the commandments of the Torah. That is heresy. There is no such thing within the Jewish tradition. It is in direct contradiction to what authentic Judaism is saying. One loses, in according to the Jewish tradition, one's share in the world to come by transgressing the commandments, not by heretical ideas, not even by atheism. Freedom of thought and conformity in action. Let me quote here a famous Jewish thinker, Professor Leon Ross of Hebrew University, who wrote some years ago the following words about Maimonides. I quote, "For this Hebrew of Hebrews has in many respects a Greek mind, and through his sense of logic, Aristotle, and his precision, he brought the Jewish tradition into a doctrinal crisis, the echoes of which are with us yet." Judaism is a perspective on life, not the outcome of a doctrine. To believe is not to prove, but to yield to a vision. Faith, emunah, geloof, is a moment when all definitions come to an end. Faith is the outcome of radical amazement, standing in awe in front of the mysterium of our lives. It is not knowledge, but experience. It is wisdom that cannot be spoken. And let us not forget that just as power can corrupt, reason can also corrupt. Let me mention somebody else here, a secular Jew who was a professor of philosophy in Princeton University, no longer alive, a Jew, Walter Kaufmann, one of the great experts on Nietzsche. In his book called Critique of Religion and Philosophy, he writes the following exact words. So true, I quote, "No dogma could ever gain authority in the Jewish tradition. Judaism refused to accept them as sacrosanct and did not allow such attempts to come between it and its Torah. It is for that reason that tension between religion and the quest for truth is almost unknown in Judaism. No sacrifice of the intellect is demanded." And then he says a fantastic line, Walter Kaufmann. "Judaism offers something the Christian is not offered. A religion without a theology." But Rabbi Mortera, being influenced by Maimonides, was not aware of it, and Spinoza paid the price. Trying to put the Jewish tradition in a dogmatic framework is like taking the Atlantic Ocean and trying to put it into a bath tube. It just doesn't work. Another issue is this. Spinoza seems, from his writings, that he had no knowledge whatsoever of the Talmud. He had no knowledge of the midrashic work because he already had left the school, the Talmud Torah, in earlier days when he had to help his father's business. And if you have no thorough understanding of the Talmud, which is more than 20 enormous volumes, with all the commentaries, and its highly unusual spirit, then there is no way how you can judge the Jewish tradition. As I mentioned before, the Talmud is in fact a compilation of infinite controversy in which nearly anything goes. And it includes, by the way, heretical ideas, rebellion against God, and considers this absolutely kosher. The Talmud is in constant loggerheads with God. You know what the Talmud is? It is an intellectual gym. It is een gymnastiekzaal van de hersenen, where everybody can say whatever he wants on any topic. Anybody who knows the Talmud, and I know what I'm speaking about, and the Chacham as well, knows how true that is. Do you know that in the Talmud the sages opposed sometimes and neutralized God and told him to mind his own business? Gemara in Bava Metzia 59b, for those who know the Talmud. The sages uprooted and changed biblical commandments because they did morally not agree with them. They called God an alila in Hebrew, a being who deliberately sets up plots against man. They even set God up against himself. I can give you proof for anything which I say over here. Why did Spinoza never mention anything of this within his Tractatus? The famous Israeli controversial philosopher you may have heard of, David Hartman, in an outstanding essay called Risk and Uncertainty, claims, and I quote him here, that Spinoza's Tractatus is a misleading caricature of what actually is going on in authentic Judaism, and the whole proposition he states there is untenable. Why, asks Hartman, does Spinoza state that Judaism is a tradition of obedience and piety, which he states clearly in the Tractatus in the 14th chapter, when in fact the whole premise of the Jewish tradition is disobedience? Hartman gives lots of examples. If anything is true, then it is that it is a tradition of rebellion against idol worship, consumerism, we would call it today, self-indulgent, the institutions of Shabbat, eating kosher, the laws concerning family purity are all expressions of revolt. The purpose of Judaism is to disturb the comfortable. I am sorry to tell you this, and I'm sure that I upset a few people here, but when it comes to Talmudic knowledge, Spinoza was, as we call it in Yiddish, a größer amoritz. He was an unbelievable ignorant person when it came to these particular matters. And I have no proof whatsoever that he had any understanding of what the Talmud was all about. And how can you speak about the Jewish tradition if you don't have the Talmud on your fingertips? But what is worse is this. Professor Emil Fackenheim, the great Holocaust philosopher, and later philosopher at Hebrew University, man very well known for Hegel and for Heidegger, writes in his work called To Mend the World and challenges Spinoza with the following words. I quote the professor, Fackenheim. Why does the author of the Ethics, who claims to rise above all bias, to nothing less than eternity, resort in his theological political treatise to the, here, grossest distortion of the minority religion which he has left? Fackenheim continues to give an example after example in his work. He then quotes Spinoza, who writes in the Tractatus, quote, How blessed would our age be if it could witness a religion freed also from all the tramples of superstition? To which Fackenheim responds, how blessed would Spinoza's philosophy have been had it transcended bias against the religion which conscience had forced him to forsake. Continues Fackenheim, Spinoza used double standards and showed total lack of even-handedness when it came to the Jewish tradition. And then he asked the following question, I quote, does this philosopher of philosophers act in bad faith? And he says, yes, he does. Let me now come to the ban. Nearly nothing has done so much damage to authentic Judaism than the ban on Spinoza. Since the days of the ban, Judaism has been reduced to a dogmatic, small-minded religion in the eyes of millions of people who know nothing about Judaism and know nothing about Spinoza. They see it as a religion like the former Catholic Church when it dealt with people like Galileo. But Judaism is much too broad for that and doesn't belong to these categories. Spinoza did not defeat Judaism, he misrepresented it. The issue is not whether or not Judaism is right or wrong. The issue is about representing an honest account of what Judaism really stands for. And Spinoza totally failed to do so. Sometimes he did not know, and sometimes it was met voorbedachte raden. Sure, it is true, Judaism has made use of bans very sporadically, a lot here in Amsterdam, true, and that is probably because of the influence of the Catholic Church from where they came, because they were all Catholic people when they came from Spain to Holland. Very sporadically, and not so much of issues of faith, of emunah, of geloof, but as a way to protect the Jewish community against Jews who brought the Jewish community into physical danger in a world which was still far from being really prepared to unconditionally accept Jews and Judaism in its midst. And I am of the opinion that that is exactly what happened with the ban of Spinoza here in Amsterdam. Amsterdam Jewish community had the problem that if they would allow this fellow to continue to say what he said and to publish, the whole community could have been exiled, moved to another world, again on their road, in Galut, in exile, and that obviously they were not prepared to risk, and therefore, as said before, he was told to leave. But it is high time to set the record straight, so that philosophers and academicians can no longer hide, like Kant did, like Hegel did, like others did, behind Spinoza and call Judaism a small-minded dogmatic religion. Instead, let us give him the honor he deserves as one of the greatest philosophers of all time. He surely helped us to think better and more mature about God, human nature, happiness, and the society in which we live. But we can only do that when we remove all his excessive caricature, which undermines his lofty ideas. And that can, in my opinion, only be done effectively when we remove the ban. And let us not forget this, my dear friends. A ban is a sign of fear. And since when is Judaism afraid? Who is afraid of Spinoza? I do not have to agree with him without denying that he was a great philosopher. And let me quote the Maharal, famous Kabbalist in the 17th century, great Jewish philosopher, Rabbi Yehuda Leuf of Prague, who wrote the following words. I translated them from Hebrew into English. One should not silence those who speak against the Jewish tradition, for to do so is an admission of weakness. Tell your opponent, speak up as much as you want, say whatever you wish. There is een certain lafheid insipidity, cowardice involved in pronouncing a ban. At the time, I understand quite well why that happened. But if we continue to hold that ban today, we are guilty of creating a bad name for that very Jewish tradition we all so much love. And let me say something else, and here I really get into trouble. Judaism is still standing in scaffolds. Het staat nog steeds in steigers. It still needs a lot of work. It has not yet given birth to many of its splendid ideas, which are still buried under a lot of thick scab that has grown on Judaism and needs to be scraped off. And some of Spinoza's ideas can help us to achieve that goal. I ask you once more, who is afraid of Spinoza? To make it clear that Judaism is not afraid, my personal opinion is that we must revoke the ban. By keeping the ban in place, we enhance, we versterken Spinoza's distorted views on Judaism, because the ban was once a political issue a few hundred years ago, but today it is seen as a religious ban damaging the Jewish tradition. So as not to be understood before I end, the reason why I propose that we should lift the ban on Spinoza are A, most of his thoughts are splendid, they're kosher and there's nothing wrong about them, and that does not need a ban. A ban is a sign of fear and does not belong within the Jewish tradition. It is a concept which was created in the Talmud in the days of the galut, of exile, when it came to beliefs, not when it came to action. That's a different story. But by removing the ban, we will remove a huge stigma on the Jewish tradition that it is a dogmatic and small-minded religion. In that way, we can appreciate Spinoza for his real great ideas without having to misrepresent what this Jewish tradition is all about. Spinoza should not be famous because of the ban, he should be famous because of his lofty ideas. But now it is the reverse. By removing the ban, we can give him all the admiration which he surely deserves without any falsification. Last but not least, I strongly believe, and I'm speaking here against myself, that it is not the Portuguese-Spanish community in Amsterdam or its rabbinate which should remove this ban. Not even the chief rabbis of Israel. They wouldn't even know who Spinoza is. It would be wonderful if the Portuguese, Spanish, the Ma'amat and the rabbi, my dear friend Rabbi Toledano, would do so, and I would be very, very deeply affected if he would. But really, it is of little importance. Truth is that according to Jewish law, the ban was lifted the moment Spinoza died. But even when you would argue that that is not the case, you should not forget the following. The ban is no longer a local Amsterdam affair. It is a global one of tremendous symbolic importance. And I believe, and I exclude myself of this so that you shall not misunderstand me, I believe that only a group of outstanding international religious Jewish thinkers will have the knowledge and the authority to do so. And I hope that that will happen. Chazak Baruch, thank you very much.